I'm very much moved by the invitation and by the award, and I thank you all for it. Many of you in the audience have been reading, or I should say have been assigned to read the stories in this book. And when I was thinking about what I would do for reading this evening, I thought, well, I could certainly read an excerpt from one of the stories, but I thought it might be better to read to you something that is not in print, that is still in manuscript. This is from the novel that I am working on, that in fact I've been working on for the last 3 years and probably will be working on for another 3 years if I can find an ending for it. It takes place in my hometown of Minneapolis, Minnesota, and there really isn't too much you need to know about what I'm going to read, except that the opening scene takes place on the light rail, which is a train that goes from downtown Minneapolis out to one of our landmarks in Minneapolis, the largest shopping mall in the lower 48 states, the Mall of America. One interesting fact about the Mall of America that probably you don't know, but everybody in Minneapolis found out a few years ago, was that it is the #1 bombing target of Al-Qaeda. The Mall of America is a bombing target, and that got me to thinking about politics in our current climate. But as you will see, this chapter is also about exactly what David pointed out in my work, namely, what do we do? What should we be doing, if anything, about the helpless, about people who need some kind of aid, and which we may or may not be ready to give them. So I'll be reading for about half an hour. And the main character in this chapter is a man of middle age named Recipient. Soon after he boarded the light rail at the downtown station, Recipient checked the available space, saw 2 empty seats next to each other at the far end of the car, and aimed himself in their direction as the doors chimed shut. Having taken the one on the aisle, he removed his Minnesota Twins baseball cap and placed it beside him so that no one would drop down there. An odd, soapy purple light, the translucent advertising sheath attached to the outside of the car, was filtering the sun, gave his hands a bruised discoloration as if he had been in a fistfight. A young couple followed him onto the train and sat down on the seats opposite his own. A man of retirement age, Recipient wore an expression of studied neutrality whenever he found himself in public, as if he possessed important secret information and needed to fade into the background to avoid exposure. Despite his age, he still had a full head of graying hair, rather bushy eyebrows, and penetrating blue eyes. Deep lines crossed his face. Though he wore khakis and a cotton sports shirt, giving an appearance of informality, he sat straight as a child who had recently been told not to slouch, and he gazed out the window with the uneasy intelligence of someone who has few illusions to comfort him. Last week on this commuter train, there had been an incident. A woman whose baby was in a stroller had pitched and rolled her way to the seat in front of him. Recipient had been close to the window, near enough to hear her panting From time to time, she had uttered soft groans. Every few seconds, she would nod and say, "Uh-huh," as if in conversation with a ghost companion. When an old man had walked past and leaned down to pat her stroller-bound infant on the head, the woman had started to shout. "Don't you touch my baby," she said, pointing at the aging passenger who, alarmed, hurried out the doors at the train's next stop. Then she had glared at Bredigan, still sitting there behind her as if he too were guilty of public touching. Collecting himself, Bredigan had pretended to stare at the landscape outside. Where he looked apparently didn't matter. "Nobody touches my baby," she said, in Bredigan's direction. She smelled of wine. Her baby probably smelled of wine. The whole car smelled of wine and Red Bull. But this morning the train had apparently been steam cleaned, and the usual professional managerial types, suited, accessorized, and iPhoned, were seated nearby, tapping out messages, talking into their Bluetooths, or reading the Wall Street Journal. Very few victims of capitalism were on the train today. Most people thought of them as the homeless, or vagrants, or the deinstitutionalized mad. One of Bredigan's friends preferred to call them scum. But for Bredigan, they were the victims of capitalism, that generously apportioned sector of the economy that had never had a single foothold on the ladder of success, and who were lying on the ground anywhere they could fall unmolested. In midsummer, you'd find them on the train rumbling out to the Mall of America, a terminal point where they would not disembark, but stay right where they were, collapsed in heaps, half asleep, and therefore semi-alert, until the train started up again and returned to downtown Minneapolis. They had no purchases. They consumed nothing but air and food scraps. Even the tattered clothes they wore seemed borrowed from somewhere. Back and forth the trains would go, carrying their half-awake human freight. Whenever Bredigan exchanged glances with one of these people, he tried to make his face express compassion and kindliness. They looked back at him with indifference or hatred. Every once or so often, one of the victims of capitalism awakened and, weighed down with God, would start to shout inspired prophecy. "Look at my wounds," one of them had loudly commanded last week, though without specifying the location. And then, "Where's Duluth?" Now the train passed by several abandoned grain elevators, blindingly white, and at 38th Street, a well-tailored gentleman boarded, wearing a three-piece suit, a trench coat, and a trophy hat. He trailed a small suitcase on wheels. His glasses consisted of small tinted circles on thin gold frames, and some property in the lenses reflected light in such a way as to make his eyes nearly invisible. Standing in the aisle next to Bredigan, bathed in soapy blue sunshine, he looked down, smiled, and asked if the seat next to Bredigan's, the one on which Bredigan's baseball cap lay, was taken. No, Bredigan said, picking up his cap, putting it on, and moving over. "Please, sit down." The man dropped down in slow motion next to Bredigan, lifting the crease in his trousers in an old-fashioned gesture. "Thank you kindly," the man said. He had a trace of a southern accent. A few moments passed. The man cleared his throat. "Thank you," he repeated, looking straight ahead before checking his watch. "You have a plane to catch?" Bredigan asked him. "Yes, you could say that," the man said. "Well, where to?" Bredigan asked him, trying to keep his questions on this side of politeness, the starchy affability one attempts with strangers. Paris, the man said. I'm going to a conference. Ah, and I have to stop at this point and say that at shopping malls and closed shopping malls in Minnesota, in the summer and winter, the elderly are often to be found walking around, getting their exercise, because in the winter it's warm in there, and in the summer it's cool. And so you see people out there exercising. And you, the man said, where might you be going? He turned to glance at Bredigan, but behind the lenses, the man's eyes remained invisible. Maybe he didn't have eyes. Maybe he had something else. Oh, me? Bredigan said. I'm headed out to the mall to get some exercise. I'll meet with some friends out there, and we'll walk around until we tire. It's air-conditioned, and although I don't particularly care for... Yes, the man said, interrupting me. I've seen them. I should say, I've seen walking around people like you. But tell me, why don't you walk around the lakes in the city or the parks outdoors? I myself enjoy the city parks this time of year. Birds and, the man thought for a moment, trees. The stranger was wearing cologne, Bredigan noticed. The scent was like autumn, aromatic burnt leaves, and the man's accent faded in and out, as if he were imitating a Southerner without being one himself. Well, I have a medical condition, Bredigan said, so I need to stay out of high temperatures, and therefore I go to the mall, the man said, interrupting him again. Yes, Bredigan said. Who was this guy? Prying into his early morning life and finishing his sentences for him. So, Bredigan said, doing his best to take control of the situation, if you don't mind my asking, what conference are you going to? Rather quickly, and as if by magic, the man reached into his pocket and drew out a business card before handing it to Bredigan. Dr. Arbor L. Jefferson, M.D., Psychoanalytic and Associated Therapies, member, Midwest Institute of Proton Analytics. The doctor's email address and phone numbers had been printed at the bottom of the card, but the ink was smudged and was illegible. I've never heard of proton analytics, Bredigan said, putting the card into his pocket. What is it? The doctor drew in a long breath. I'll give you an example. You see that man over there, nodding in the direction of the young couple who had followed Bredigan onto the train. The man wore headphones over his ears, and a stack of pamphlets was in his lap. The woman seemed to be studying both Bredigan and the doctor. Yes, the doctor said, that one. As soon as I get off this train, he will ask you for money. He will test you. He will beg you for something, anything. You must give him $1 at least. Do you know the legend of Notre Seigneur en pauvre, our Lord in rags? Bredigan shook his head. It's a French-Canadian legend of Jesus, the doctor said, warming to the subject. And in this legend, Jesus is dressed as a beggar and is roaming the earth, testing the generosity of everyone he meets. It is a spot quiz for your salvation. You could think of that man over there as Jesus. I recommend that you do so. Did you say that you have a medical condition? Bredigan nodded. The airport is coming up soon, and I will have to be on my way, the doctor informed Bredigan. But I will tell you of another legend that grew up among my people in the South. This will help you, I guarantee you. It will help you personally. Here is what you must do. This is a cure for affliction. The doctor now seemed nervously energized and was enunciating his words with care as if you were speaking to a child. Find a mirror, the largest one that you can easily carry. Let's say a hand mirror, and take that mirror to a creek, or even better, a flowing stream, or best of all, a river. And here is what you must do. You must lower the mirror into the water. As he spoke, the doctor's hands moved in the air in front of him, pantomiming, or so it seemed to Bredigan, a vigorous form of washing. The water has to flow over the mirror or the cure won't work. And once you have the water streaming over the glass, you wash your reflected face in the mirror, not your actual face, but your mirrored face in the water, holding the mirror so as not to lose it. You wash your face, your reflected face, your face in the mirror, and you will get well. You will recover, and renewed you will prosper. I give you my personal guarantee. Really, I promise you will get better.